Ronald Keith Williamson and Dennis Fritz were wrongly accused of rape and murder of Deborah Sue Carter in 1988 in Oklahoma. Ronald was born and raised in Ada, Oklahoma. He was the youngest of 3 children and the only son. He was a standout athlete, and his primary interest being baseball. He played baseball at Asher High School. He was the 41st pickup in baseball's 1971 amateur draft. Foregoing a scholarship offer from the University of Oklahoma, he signed and spent the 1972 season primarily with the Coos K North Bent A's, hitting a .265 in 52 games. A shoulder injury derailed his career for the next few years. He converted to being a pitcher in the minor league system with the New York Yankees, but recurring shoulder problems limited his appearances and effectiveness. At the age of 24, his once promising baseball career was over. After returning to Oklahoma, he held several other jobs and became addicted to drugs, alcohol, and suffered from increasingly severe mental illness, becoming depressed and living with his mother Juanita. On December 9, 1982, Debbie had visited Coach Light, which was a bar Ronald frequently visited as well. She was found raped and murdered in her home and left with words written on her body in ketchup. A friend who had discovered her naked body on her bedroom floor, gagged with a bloody towel and with the word "die" written on her stomach. Ronald became implicated after a witness, Glenn Gore, reported hearing him harass Debbie at the Coach Light Club where she worked as a waitress on the night that she was killed. Dennis, who was a high school science teacher and a single father to his daughter, following the murder of her mother, he also came under suspicion because he was known to frequent the same bar. Neither one of them had alibis for the night of the murder, but without solid evidence, the police couldn't arrest them. Both were initially questioned early in the investigation and let go due to the lack of physical evidence. As the years went, prosecutors failed to bring any charges for the murder, and Ronald went to prison for forging checks. While he was there, a prison informant, Terry Holland, told prosecutors that Ronald had confessed to killing Debbie. They jumped on that tip and then both were arrested in 1987. In separate trials, both of them were found guilty in 1988. Ronald received a death sentence and Dennis was sentenced to life without parole. The evidence included expert testimony in hair analysis, which is not regarded as unreliable. The expert included that 13 of the 17 hairs found at the crime scene were microscopically consistent with those of Dennis and Ronald, and alleged that one of them was a match. The defense failed to point out that although the hair samples could have implicated them both, they equally could have cleared them. Despite the rapid decrease in his mental health, no motion was made to assess Ronald's competence. After their sentencing, a confession by a man named Ricky Joe Simmons came to light. Having learned of this while on death row, Ronald became increasingly convinced that Ricky had committed the murder and repeatedly demanded his arrest, but Ricky was never charged. On September 22, 1992, Ronald was only 5 days away from being executed when his execution was stayed by the court. Following a habeas corpus petition, he screamed "I'm innocent" over and over from his cell to protest his impending execution. After 11 years on death row and following several appeals, they were cleared by DNA testing and finally freed on April 15, 1999. In 2003, they sued the city of Ada and won a settlement of $500,000. So who murdered Debbie? It was Glenn Gore, the witness who testified against Ronald. He was the last person to actually be seen with Debbie and also had been seen arguing with her on the night of her death. Although he was interviewed by the police, he was not fingerprinted, nor did he give saliva and hair samples. While Ronald and Dennis were incarcerated, Glenn was also imprisoned on another unrelated violent crime conviction. Once Ronald and Dennis had been cleared for murder, Glenn eventually came to trial based on the same DNA evidence that had cleared the exonerated. This evidence proved that it was Glenn's DNA that was left at the scene. On June 24, 2003, Glenn was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, but his death sentence was overturned in 2005 in August. He was eventually convicted at a second trial on June 21, 2006, and sentenced to life without parole. What do you think of this case? Do let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you for the next one.